Number 1.
It's taken me a long time to try to figure out how to start my experiences with my youngest daughter, who I will call JC, and I think she used to be able to see things. When these things happened with JC, we lived in Louisiana at the time. This was about 9 years ago this all happened. My husband was military. We had moved off the base and into a small town, and an adorable little house. I had some personal experiences happen in this house that I will tell another time. JC was 3 when things got strange. Up to that time, I had not noticed anything. JC's older sister was in school, and for the most part, it was just me and her home during the day, hanging out and doing our own thing. I was finishing up my teaching degree at the time, and had a lot of homework. I let JC watch TV when I needed to do homework. One day, JC stopped watching TV after Dora the Explorer, and headed off to her room. This wasn't unusual because a lot of times her attention was diverted at the end of a program. What I remember is she came back to me a little later and told me she had a friend. Could her friend play? Being distracted, I remember only saying yes. Then things started to get weird because a pattern started to emerge, and that's when I started paying attention. Every day at 9:30 a.m., when Dora the Explorer ended, she had a friend. JC would look down the hall and say things like, "Oh, my friend is here." She'd run down the hall. Sometimes, Dora wasn't even all the way over, and JC would act like she'd heard something, and say her friend was here and run down the hall. One day, she came to me and said, "My friend's brother would like to come play too. Is that okay?" I said, "Sure." I started to ask questions, and I started watching what was going on around me. I've written down this information before because it was quite fascinating. The friends came every day. Once I said the brother could come, they were both at our house every day. When I was feeding JC lunch one day, I asked if her friends wanted or needed lunch too. She told me no. I asked, "Why? Aren't they hungry?" She told me they didn't eat. I told her everyone ate, but she told me they didn't need to eat. I asked to take pictures of her friends. I went to her room to ask about pictures, and I took a camera. She told me that they were scared of me and didn't want their picture taken. I told her I wasn't scary, and I'd really like a picture. She paused, as if listening, and said they were still too scared. I asked several times for permission to take pictures, but never did get permission. One time in the car, while waiting to get her older sister out of school, I questioned more. "Where do your friends live?" She answered, "In the forest." "Where in the forest?" She answered, "In the burned-out Rainbow House." Almost all of Louisiana is forest, and forest isn't really a word 3-year-olds use. "What are their names?" She answered, "I don't know." I was once asked if the friends could stay the night. I agreed, and that night, more than once, I kept hearing stuff behind me while I was the only one up. I did snap pictures, but sadly, when I saw nothing, I deleted them. I wish I'd kept them to analyze them further. Remember the burned-out Rainbow House in the forest? Well, my hubby and I like to explore by driving down roads we'd never been down. We lived on a dead-end road ourselves. Once I wanted to show my husband where another teacher friend lived, and her road was parallel to the one we lived on. I showed him where her house was, and we kept driving down that road, and we found a burned-out house. I can't say there was anything rainbow-like about it, but it really wasn't that far from our own home. I remember the feeling when we saw the house, too. I think it triggered something in both of us when we saw it. We kind of slowed down and looked at each other, but said nothing. I caught JC playing with her friends one day, and it was a little spooky, since I couldn't see them or hear them. I had many times walked by JC's room at the end of the hall, only to have her look at me and scold me because I scared her friends away. One day I got on my hands and knees. I crawled down the hall and peeked around the door. I saw JC on the floor with My Little Ponies. Her back was to me. She was having a conversation with someone. I had heard her having these types of conversations before, She'd say things and pause like she was listening to someone else. She'd even appear to be looking at someone who was talking. This time was no different. I remember her moving her pony on the floor, and I want to add there was another set of ponies on the floor across from her, as if another child was there playing. JC had just said something, looked at whoever was across from her, turned around toward me and said, "Mom, I know you are there. My friend told me. You scared her." I turned around and crawled away to think about what had just happened. These friends stayed around until JC eventually went to kindergarten, and I started teaching that same year. I don't know what to make of the whole event, but more things happened in that little house I loved, and I will write more about it another time. JC is now a teen. She has some memory of her friends, but she doesn't like to talk about them.
Number 2.
My story is actually several small stories that fall under one category. My kids creeping me the hell out. For the sake of simplicity, I'll tell these stories in order, from oldest to newest, and by which child they relate to. Some are about my little cousin, some about my own daughter, and some about my nephew. When I was a teenager and young adult, my uncle and aunt used to go out of town a lot on business, so I babysat my little cousins. A lot. One night, when Shay was about 2 or 3 years old, I just crawled into bed with her as my aunt and uncle were leaving in the wee hours to catch a plane. All of a sudden, she sat up and looked toward the center of her bedroom at the foot of her bed. I tried to get her to lay back down, but she continued looking at the same spot. Then she asked me, "Sissy, who is that white lady?" I, of course, asked the logical question, "What lady?" Then in that "you're so dumb" tone that only toddlers and teenagers can manage, she huffed and said, as if it was obvious, "The white lady in the white dress, right there." She was pointing at the end of her bed. I just calmly laid her back down and spent the rest of the night snuggled up to her with the covers over my head. Shay also had a habit of waving when we passed cemeteries and shouting, "Hi, y'all!" even when she was small enough that she couldn't see out the window to tell we were passing a cemetery. My uncle was sure I taught her that trick, but nope, wasn't me. When my daughter Noah was a baby, my rocking recliner faced away from my front door. She had a habit of stretching up to look over my shoulder as I rocked her, saying "Papa." This is how I always knew when my daddy, her papa, was stopping by to see her on his way home from work, because every time she would do that, he would show up a few minutes later. When she was 1.5, I'm sure of her age because I just began keeping a 6-month-old who was almost exactly a year younger than her. One morning I heard her stirring and went in to get her. She looked at me with the sweetest sleepy smile and said, "Jesus is coming today." Now, I have to say, that freaked me out a little, because I didn't know if she meant it generally or if he was just coming for her. So needless to say, I kept Noah and her new friend extra close that day. When Noah was about 5, she woke up saying that she hallucinated a black cat running across her bed and ran out the door. She even told her pediatrician at her next appointment, to which he replied, "You don't even know what hallucinate means." She put her hands on her hips and said, "Yes, I do. It means I saw it and it wasn't really there." This cracked him up. Of course, he should have expected as much. She had been speaking in full sentences since she was 13 months old. I'm sure if I thought about it, I would have lots more to tell about Noah, but this is already very long, so I'll move on. When my nephew, Talon, was small, he had several imaginary friends. They were forever freaking my sister out. One was the Red Man. He always said it like that was his name. There are lots of stories, but one I remember that really freaked my sister out was when Talon, who was about 2 at the time, was yelling at the Red Man because he was trying to watch TV, and the Red Man was dancing on top of the entertainment center. He was so mad, and even told his mom to make him stop. When Talon was about 3, my great aunt and uncle were murdered in their home, and were buried in our family cemetery on our land. Tally didn't know the deceased, as he was so small and we really only saw them at Christmas. Shortly after the murders, Talon gained a new friend, the White Man. He talked to him and talked about him for days, Then one day we were having dinner at my granny's. One of the memorials with the deceased photos on it was laying on the dining room table. Talon picked it up all excited and said, "Look, Mama, it's the white man." We all about died. Now, Talon had one friend that stuck around longer than the rest. His name was Jungala. He was always talking about him and playing with him. Then I noticed I hadn't heard about him in a few days, so I asked Talon about him. He told me he didn't like Jungala anymore because he was mean. He said Jungala was up in a tree listening to us while we talked. I asked what Jungala looked like, and here's how my 3.5-year-old nephew described him. He is red. Talon had already told us Jungala was not the red man, that he was different. And has a big butt from drinking too much sugar, and has 2 big ears that stick out right here. He illustrated by poking one finger on each hand straight up from his forehead, one on each side, like horns. Jungala kind of went away after that. One night, years later, my daughter and I were in the theater watching a horror film, our favorite, when one of the demons was called by name. It sounded just like they said Jungala. We both looked at each other and were freaked out enough that our friend asked what in the world was wrong with us. After they said the name again, we realized it was almost the same, but a little different. This made me feel better, until Noah said, "Yeah, but Talon was little. Maybe he was saying it wrong." Yup, still freaks me out thinking about it.
Number 3.
My name is Paige, and I am a 20-year-old college student, living with my boyfriend Nick. For as long as I can remember, the paranormal has always surrounded me. It was a very open topic between me and my father, and later on in life my mother began to accept it a little more as she began to experience things herself, though she still tries to avoid the subject as much as possible, and chalks pretty much everything up to an overactive imagination. I always felt as if I was a magnet to the paranormal, and it wasn't until I was around 8 or 9 years old that my father gave me an explanation, to the best of his ability. I still remember almost word for word what he said, because it resonated with me so much. My father said, "All right, punk, there's something you should know. Our family is more sensitive to things than other people. It's like they're drawn to us. It's in our blood. Promise me you'll stay away from Ouija boards, tarot cards, and anything of the sort. It'll open things you want no part in." I promised him I would, and we went back to our normal everyday lives. So now that I've given you a little bit of insight into my life, I'll start with the very first experience I can remember. At the age of 3, I lived in Pottstown with both my mother and father on the 5th floor of an apartment building. I don't remember the layout of the house very well, having been so young, but I distinctly remember that in order to get to my parents' bedroom, you had to go through mine, which was fairly large. There was a doorway in the back left corner leading to their bedroom, and then a doorway right next to my bed, on the right, leading to the living room. When we moved into this house, I acquired 2 imaginary friends, twin boys named Jimmy and Joey. My parents never thought anything of it. Here's where it starts to get a little weird. Unlike my other imaginary friends, who I made up, so to speak, I can recall their images vividly, as if they had been actual people. They are identical, on the heavier side, African-American children with very dark eyes, always dressed in the same clothing, tan pants and a white button-down shirt. They quickly became my best friends, and we played every single day. They were never mean to me, and I never felt threatened in their presence, though I always thought it odd that when I asked them to come outside and play or go somewhere with me, they told me their mother needed them home for something. Until one day, we were all playing in my room, which contained a little playhouse that people normally put outside in their yard. But as I said before, my room was pretty big for being 3, and we had no yard to put it in. Jimmy and Joey began convincing me that I could fly like a bird. The memory is a bit hazy with time, but I remember one of them saying, "Come on, just jump. I promise you, as soon as you jump, we'll be flying in the sky together. We'll be like birds. Just do it." So, being a toddler, I began climbing onto the playhouse roof, which I could never have accomplished on my own. and faced our 5th-story window. Luckily, it was that exact moment that my mom decided to walk in the room and check on me, snatching me off that roof as I bent my legs to take a leap. She was bewildered as to how I had managed to get up there in the first place, but I just wailed that Jimmy and Joey had told me to do it, and they should get in trouble too. My mom humored me, and turned to what she thought was thin air and sent them away to juvie, telling them that they weren't welcome in her home any longer. Little did she know, they never showed up again. As I got older, we shared more of the little details on it and joked about them wanting me to play with them forever. But deep down I shiver a little thinking about it. Had my mother not walked in that day, I would have killed myself at 3 years old. I hope you enjoyed the stories this time. I don't think I've ever done the imaginary friend subject matter before. It's quite fascinating, especially that last story. Reading what that spirit said to the kid about jumping out his window gave me chills as I read it. You guys literally heard me reading that line for the first time while recording it. I tried so hard not to let my surprise and feeling of being creeped the hell out come through my narration. I hope I did a good job. Anyway, October is almost here, huh? I'll have to see about getting some extra creepy stories for this coming month. By the way, I have to apologize about the sporadic uploads. I've been working a lot on self-improvement lately and I just get really sidetracked. But yeah, I guess I don't really have much more to say right now other than that. So, I hope you go on to have a good day. Or night. If it's fear you're after, welcome home.